So Tom, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely honored to be able to kick off this conference and to talk about actually a very fun subject, psychology and dark psychology. When we think about innovation, we usually think about technology. That's the first thing we think about. But I want to argue that we should think about innovation in a much more pragmatic way. Basically, innovation is all about doing new stuff in order to figure out how to create growth. And if you take that pragmatic definition as your point of departure, I think there's a lot more to be gained from looking into psychology than looking into technology. So what I want to do in this half hour is to really make the case, to make you fall in love with psychology as an interesting, as actually one of the most interesting sources of innovation. And since it's early in the morning and since you still need to get into it anymore, I want to start with three riddles. Three riddles that I want to present to you and want to solve in my presentation. So this is the first one. Question here is, how come that a soft drink that was consistently tested as quote-unquote disgusting during taste panels became one of the best-selling and most profitable soda drinks in the world? Interesting mystery. Second thing is, how come that a man who is clearly a criminal and a psychiatric case became the president of the most powerful nation in the world? Quite interesting. And third riddle is, how come that more and more young people are using the real world as a theater stage for their social media life? This is actually a picture from a blog called Boyfriends of Instagrammers, which is a hilarious blog about the poor bastards who have to constantly have to put up with the theater from their girlfriends. So this completely weird thing is going on, that the real world is nothing more than a stage for the virtual world. Quite interesting. How come this is possible? And so the theme that connects these three riddles is what I would call psychological innovation. It's the application of behavioral psychology, the science of influence, to figure out how to influence minds and shape behavior. And before we delve into that dark psychology, I want to absolutely make the case that this is a dark wisdom. You can do two things with a better understanding of how to influence minds and shape behavior. You can use it to get people completely addicted and hooked to technology, and you can use it to exploit their fears and their anxieties and their desires. You can combine psychology with technology and weaponize it, to get people hooked and addicted. But you can also use the same dark psychology to shape positive behaviors, to get people to exercise more, to eat healthier, to contribute to climate change, to live a more sustainable life, to get them to contribute to more healthy communities, to get them to donate, etc., etc. So the dark wisdom of behavioral psychology is not dark as such, it's what we do with it. And as you will see in the examples that I give, and I think this is really the common theme throughout my talk, is that those who use that dark wisdom to do the worst thing with it usually are much better at it than those who can apply it to do good things with it. And so I hope you'll fall in love with the idea that we should kind of shred off a bit our reluctancy to use psychology to create better products, better services, and to help people to make better choices. So there's one theoretical slide in my presentation. It's the following. If you want to understand how influence works, you need to understand human decision making. Because if you understand how we make decisions in our brain, then you can come up with better ideas to influence decision making. And if you want to understand human decision making, you can basically drill it down to one book. Whom of you have read Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman? Raise your hands. All right, a couple of people. This is really the Bible of behavioral psychology, and I would say the Bible of the science of influence. What Kahneman and Tversky discovered with their groundbreaking book, for which they were the first psychologists to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002. By the way, there's three new. They're not really psychologists, but their method with which they won the Nobel Prize in Economics this week for their work on poverty is completely rooted within this thinking. So it's a really, really exciting times to look into economics because the role of psychology in economics is really at the core, at the forefront of all the interesting developments. But Kahneman and Tversky discovered in their book, in their research and published in their book Thinking Fast and Slow, that there's two modes of thinking in our brain. And they have these really beautiful poetic names for these modes of thinking, call them System 1 and System 2. And so what they saw was that that most of the decisions, apparently there are, some science says there's 30,000 decisions that are being presented at us in a day, and practically all of them are being taken care of by our automatic brain, our fast brain, the part of our brain that does the thinking for us, System 1. Whereas System 2, our rational brain, is only a tiny fraction of the mental capacity of our brain. So whereas System 1 is automatic, is fast, it does the thinking for us, System 2 is really on demand, very slow. It only can work if we activate it ourselves. What the shocking thing is about System 1 and System 2 thinking is that System 1 makes all the decisions for us, and System 2 kind of post-rationalizes them. And that's a tough one, because we think of ourselves that we are rational people, and we usually, when we work in professional communication, we tend to think that the other is also a rational person. And we're absolutely not. Basically, all of our decisions are first made intuitively, and then our System 2, we also call this the slave. Our slave just post-rationalizes and feeds us with the arguments to post-rationalize our decision. A famous research on this is they did a little experiment in job interviews, and turns out if you do a job interview, within 2 minutes you have decided whether you want this candidate or not, and then you use the rest of the interview to post-rationalize and to look for arguments to justify your initial decision. And your initial decision is purely based on shortcuts. You like this person, you kind of see that person working in your team, and then you find all the arguments afterwards to post-rationalize it. And so that's a tough one. But what's important about System 1 and System 2 thinking is that if it's the case that all of the decisions we make with our automatic brain, with our System 1, then our job as professionals, as marketeers, as product developers, is to offer System 1 shortcuts so that System 1 can make a decision without having to think. This is really the core idea of my presentation. If you want to influence minds and shape behavior, you have to give System 1 a shortcut so people can make a decision without having to think. Remember this, I'll come back to it a couple of times. So this brings me with my first mystery. How is it possible that a drink that was consistently tested as disgusting became a worldwide bestseller? Well, the simple idea is that Red Bull succeeded very well in offering our System 1 a shortcut that it has this potent power. It gives you wings, it gives you energy. And when you have this System 1 shortcut combined with this really peculiar taste, you kind of start to think, it tastes really weird, it must be a powerful thing, just like medicine. If a medicine sounds good, you don't trust it. If a drink tastes really bad, it must have some weird, mysterious forces. What they also did really well is they designed it for incomparability. They created new forms of cans so in such a way that you couldn't compare it with traditional soft drinks. So it became a category on its own. And I actually think, I realized this morning, that even these ones, they actually feel a bit like these Yakult bottles. So it's already in the design, the shortcut, that it has magic powers. So what I want to do is to walk you through a couple of psychological principles, psychological techniques to look for ideas for psychological innovation. And so the first one is, if you want to design the perception of value, you simply have to think about the context in which you present the choice. In other words, the context in which you present the choice completely determines the perception of value. Your System 1 is constantly scanning for cues to determine, is this item of high value or is this item of low value? Because basically we have no idea. We look for shortcuts. So a couple of examples. On the left here, there's William Sonoma. They had this bread baking machine. Nobody knows what a bread baking machine should cost. And at a certain point, they only had one. And it didn't sell at all. And at certain points, someone realized, let's just put a second one next to it. And so by putting a second one next to it that cost 225 euros instead of 117, suddenly the right one started to sell. Because in the shadow of the left one, the right one suddenly made sense and felt like a bargain. There's always, by the way, a tiny fraction of people who all also buy the most expensive one, because now they know that they were able to buy something that is more expensive than what normal humans would buy. The reason, by the way, why IKEA has its restaurant in the beginning of the IKEA shop is that we have a pretty good idea about what eating out in a restaurant costs. And it costs about a fourth of what you would normally pay in a city for dinner. And it's exactly with the same kind of, kind of balance that you then walk into the store, the same price anchoring you walk into the store, because you basically have no idea what furniture would cost. And it's not a secret that in the world of luxury items, you first get anchored by the highly expensive items, like the 10,000 euros handbags. And most of their sales is basically all about the sunglasses and the wallets that cost about 150 euros. If you would put this 150 euro sunglass in an H&M store, people would think you're completely bonkers. But a 150 euro sunglass in a Louis Vuitton store feels like a little bargain entrance into the Louis Vuitton dream. There's this funny story about black pearls. Apparently, when black pearls were first found somewhere around Haiti, and they were put on the market, nobody wanted to buy them because people somehow felt that they were cheap. And so the distributor, I think it was about 100 years ago, came up with this genius idea that he took back all the pearls from the market, then closed the deal with Tiffany's in New York to put the black pearls in their main window. And suddenly, he overpriced it like 100-fold. And suddenly it became the most expensive pearl in the market, simply because the context in which the choice was presented anchored people to believe that the perception of a black pearl was gigantic. And so there's this interesting thing around how do we present choices? What is the context with which we present the value of choices? Is conference calling the poor man's alternative to traveling? Or is it the rich man's alternative to phone calling? I think we are framing conference calling in the wrong way these days. By the way, there has been this interesting experiment on the sales of, actually this is what Starbucks do all the time. So if you would first present two choices, you can buy a coffee or a coffee and a muffin with 4 euros, nobody would buy the coffee and the muffin. But if you would put in a decoy, it's what they call in price psychology, in the middle, you would say we have a coffee, we have a muffin of 3.95 and a coffee of a muffin of 4 euros, everyone will go for the coffee and the muffin. Because with the decoy in the middle, it suddenly feels like a bargain. And there's this funny last example of this idea that the perception of value is completely determined by the context in which you present a choice. There were two comedians, I think a year ago in Australia, Amish and Andy, who invited Ed Sheeran to sit on a stool in an Ed Sheeran peep show. So they hired a little shop in a shopping street, put on signs, if you want to see Ed Sheeran, there's the Ed Sheeran peep show. People would easily pay 150 euros to see Ed Sheeran. It took him about 4 hours to get 2 people to pay 2 euros to see Ed Sheeran, because the way that the choice was presented completely signaled to people, don't trust this is wrong, this is bad. But he was sitting there, and so the first people, the clip is on YouTube, you must watch it, really hilarious. So the people who have eventually got the nerves to come in couldn't believe what they were seeing. Psychological innovation technique 2 is the principle of question substitution. If you want to influence minds and shape behavior, think about a much more easy or fun or exciting question to answer, to which the desired behavior is exactly the answer. So I've been working I had the honor to work for the Dutch Liberal Party and Dutch Prime Minister now for 3 to 4 years in figuring out how to beat extreme right-wing populism in the Netherlands and win elections. And what centrist people are usually very bad at in the Netherlands, but I guess it's definitely the same in Germany, is that they tend to talk to system 2. They tend to present all these rational arguments why you should vote on them. And what they're saying is basically read our program, think about our plans and our ideas. And what populists are really good at, they simply present you with a much easier question to answer. And so the extreme right populist in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, you know, the one with the funny haircut. Every populist in the world has a funny haircut. Haven't you noticed? It's strange, isn't it? He basically presents his voters with two very, very easy questions to answer. And I would say that the populist playbook all over the world presents people with exactly the same two questions. You want to punish the elite who betrayed you and who is only working for the riches and not for the ordinary man? Vote for me, I will kick their ass. And if you want to get rid of immigrants who are going to steal your job, vote for me, I'm the only one who will do something against that. That's a much more easier question to answer. And so people go, yeah, I'll vote for him. And so what we basically did with the Liberal Party was to design the whole campaign and the whole debate and the whole election around one simple question. And it was the question, what kind of leader does this country need? Do we need an optimist leader like Mark Rutte, or do you want a pessimist leader like the extreme right populist? And so by basically presenting a simple binary choice, people answered the question, we want this optimist leader. And we, a bit to everyone's surprise, we won the election. Third principle is framing, is metaphors. We only understand the world through metaphors. And the metaphors we present to people to look at the world really determine the way they see the world and they look at the world. And this is, when you think about it, this is really the darkest principle of them all, because we don't really realize what the frames are that are being used on us. They are invisible, but they really determine a lot the way we think. So best example, I think, or most powerful example of this is what happened in the Brexit story. Again, the question, do you want to stay within the EU or want to get out of the EU, is a very System 2 question. So the Leave camp transformed that question in a much easier question to answer, is, do we want the gates to be opened and to be flooded by immigrants who are going to steal your job and rape your daughters? That's the question that was asked. And that was a much more powerful question that was asked. And so people weren't voting for all the rational reasons to get out of the EU. They answered this very, very simpler question to answer. And by the way, this is what populists all over the world do. They use these viral metaphors to talk about migration. It's like this intrusion, this flood, this immune system that is being weakened, and it's a very, very powerful metaphor that really speaks to our unconsciousness. Also an interesting one, and there you can see how subtle the use of framing is and how much framing determines the way we think about things. You have to think about words as activating little networks of other words in your brains. Whenever I use a word, all kinds of associated words are being lit up in your brain. And so if you go to an Apple store, you don't go to a help desk, you go to a Genius bar. And that's actually quite genius, because if you think about it, if you go to a Genius bar, yeah, well, you're not stupid. These things are so complicated, you need a genius to look at it. If you go to a help desk, you're stupid, you need help. It's the same thing, by the way, with, do you work in a call center or a customer success team? Exactly the same job. I would much rather work in the customer success team. This brings me to my second riddle. The reason why he gets away with everything, with completely unacceptable behavior, is that he was able to use the word deal maker. He constantly used the frame, I'm a deal maker, I'm a businessman. And people accept from deal makers and businessmen that they use dirty tricks in order to get the job done. And so they forgive him everything. And what he really does well is he simply contrasts his approach, his deal-making approach, with the swamp of politicians, with all their dirty games and their backroom games. Which is, I think, and what is so good about, purely from a technical point of view, what is so good about Trump and Johnson and all these populists is that they're highly disciplined. They keep repeating the same frames all over again. And that's really a problem with more centrist politicians, is that they can't stick to their frame. Even sometimes they just don't have a frame. If you think about framing, one of the big challenges, if you want to get, to get people to switch to plant-based diets and to get rid of meat, there's a lot of resistance. Somehow it's an insult to lots of people, their manlyhood, if you want to take away their meat. And so a lot of these vegetarian plant-based dinner are framed as, as less enjoyment. And that's why I think Beyond Burger is such a great idea. Whom of you has eaten a Beyond Burger? Yeah, it's pretty meatish, isn't it? Not meatish. And I love the framing. It's not just a smaller, less tasteful version. It goes beyond the burger. It's the most masculine vegetarian thing you can possibly think of. That's why I also think that in policy making and decision in policy making, we should also think about psychological innovation. One of the biggest problem with taxes is that literally the whole frame of a tax is a burden, and tax relief is about relieving people from the burden of a tax. That's a really bad frame. We should start frame, and if you avoid taxes, then you're actually a smart person. You know how to play the game. You know how to play the rules. I think we should reframe taxes to contribution. And taxes are all about paying your contribution. And if cheaters, it's like contribution to a club. If you contribute to a club, you can benefit from all the benefits from a club. And if you don't contribute, well, cheaters don't pay for their contribution. We can reframe cheating. We can reframe tax avoidance. And I think we should also turn big contributors into heroes. Because if you want to get rich people to pay their contribution, just turn them into heroes instead of making them to be the smartest people in the room. I'll skip this one because I think time-wise we'll get into trouble. Climate change is also a framing problem. Literally, the word climate change was invented by a Republican think tank in America because climate change sounds much friendlier. It's something much more abstract. You don't know what is happening with climate change. So The Guardian decided to as of a couple of months ago, to never use the word climate change again. They're constantly now talking about climate crisis. They're talking about global heating, not global warming. They're talking about climate deniers, just like Holocaust deniers, instead of climate skeptics. A climate skeptic would say, yeah, there's still the science is not out there yet. No, you're a climate denier. The science is very clear in it, we're in trouble. And I think again that the progressive movement, the Youth for Climate, all these protesters should. The problem today with the Greta Thunbergs of this world is that they're selling the apocalypse. And if there's one thing that we don't like, is that we're constantly being told, definitely by young people, that we're guilty, that we need to stop consuming, that trouble is on its way. It's quite easy for us to simply ignore that message. So if the progressive camp wants to sell excitement for climate change, they should frame it in a very positive way. They should frame it about jobs, about clean air, about cheap energy, cheap and abundant energy, about clean communities, about independence of rock states, about more comfort of living. That's the dream that we can sell if we contribute to it. These are really the two short books, but the essential reading on framing if you want to delve into that subject. Principle 4, psychological innovation domain number 4 is the idea that our system 1 really likes to think of the world divide the world in two camps. And if you can present the world in two camps, people will choose sides. People want to belong to one camp. And there's no better way to create a tribe than to present them with an enemy. And so if you can divide the world in two and give people an in-group to belong to by offering them an out-group to fight against, this is like mental heroin for our system 1. So a great example is what Nike did with Colin Kaepernick. which backfired completely 2 weeks ago. So they said, believe in something, even it means sacrificing everything. You know, this NFL guy who stood up against Trump, and they set out this ad in order to, you know, to support him. And of course, a lot of people who felt insulted by his acts were burning their Nike shoes. And what Nike basically did is they presented two camps, and they presented the Nike fans a camp to belong to. It completely backfired because a couple of weeks ago, the Houston Rockets coach paid his sympathy for the Hong Kong protests, and the Chinese government wasn't happy with that, so they asked Nike to get rid of all their Houston Rockets gear in Chinese stores, and they immediately did. So it is, of course, the complete opposite of what they are saying here. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Yeah, until the Chinese governments ask us to do something. So this is I'm not that much of a fan of all this wave of purpose-driven thinking, because most of the time purpose is just a marketing story. But when push comes to shove, people aren't that committed to their marketing story. And so again, in politics, we saw after the last election that the liberals were kind of losing their fighting spirit. And so we organized a TV debate with our new populist, Thierry Baudet, in the Netherlands, and it really revitalized the whole base simply by offering them an enemy. And there was a TV debate a couple of months ago, and I was in the room because the liberals were allowed to invite 100 people, and then Baudet from the Forum of Democracy were allowed to invite 100 people, and you can feel the tension in the air. It was like people were into a fight. It was amazing. Simply divide the world in two camps, and you can create a lot of excitement around that. Okay. This is, I think, a really interesting one. The paradox of choice, the paradox of freedom, is that what we're really craving for is to be protected against our own impossibility to do the right thing. I became practically a full-time vegetarian since 3 months, and the way that we did it was very easy. On Saturday, my wife and I decided to go shopping in the supermarket and only shop for vegetarian recipes. And then in my company, we decided to get rid of meat in the lunch, and suddenly it became very easy for me to perform vegetarian behavior. I made the undesired behavior more difficult and the desired behavior easy. And what happens, and this is really an interesting thing in psychology, is that if you can trigger behavior, people will start to observe their behavior and then adapt their attitudes based on observing their own behavior. So after a couple of weeks, I was thinking, hey, I'm eating vegetarian for 2 weeks now. I must be a vegetarian. And so it became easy for me to stick to the habit. There's this famous app here, and it's popular in the Nordic countries, in Norway and countries like that. Half of the students are using it. It's called Hold, and you get points for not using your smartphone. So the longer you use the hold button and it blocks your smartphone, the more points you get. People are completely excited about it because it helps them to get rid of their addiction, their smartphone addiction during studying. I only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to end with this one, and then with a short conclusion. Thinking outside in. I think that. And this is, by the way, I'm going to do a workshop this afternoon at 4 o'clock. This is what my workshop is going to be about, just saying. If you want to understand how to influence minds and shape behavior, you need to think outside in. You need to start with the goals and the dreams and the problem of the user. And I think this is what the UBX frame is also all about. And then try to think of the product and the service as the best possible way for people to achieve their goals, to reach their goals or to solve their problems. So this is Steve Vaughn. He's a sales rep at HubSpot, marketing automation platform. And he sold me the platform in a 5-minute call. And the only thing he did, was I think 5 years ago, the only thing he did is he sent me an email. I said, look, I've seen you've downloaded a white paper on marketing automation for agencies. Can I give you a little call? Because I have a lot of experience with agencies. I want to share a couple of insights we've learned. I said, sure, why not? He said, well, do you most of my clients tell us that back in the day we still had an advertising agency. I said most of my clients, they say that it has become more difficult and difficult to get retainer fees. It's all project-based. Do you recognize that? And I was going, yeah. And then he asked me 5 more questions, and every time I said, yeah, that's exactly us. And at the end, he didn't have to sell me the platform. I was just going, take my money. If you think about it, normally there's this little rule in slide decks that if you use Uber or Airbnb in your slide deck, a little cute kitten dies a horrible death. So I only have one Uber slide. But if you think about Uber, and this brings me back to my beginning of technological innovation versus psychological innovation. We tend to think of Uber as a typical technological Silicon Valley company. But what is really disruptive and what is really innovative about Uber is the fact that they were able to solve all the friction in the taxi experience. The fact that you didn't know when your taxi was going to show up, the fact that you had to trust the driver and weren't sure if you could trust the driver, the fact that you had to negotiate for the price and this uncomfortable bargain and negotiation, how much tip do I need to give them. Uber basically took away all this friction from the taxi experience, and that's what makes this, of course, and the inflow of endless capital. But this is what really makes it so disruptive. It's psychology, not technology. And so I want to finish with this. I think the reason why we're so addicted to our smartphones, why we're constantly being disturbed, is because these technological companies have figured out ways to combine psychology and technology and weaponize it against us and exploit our deepest desires, fears, anxieties, and use it against them in order for us to spend as much time as possible on these devices. They hijack our brain. And I think this is a beautiful quote. They have dragged us into a race to the bottom of the brainstem of our brain. And I think we should be, first of all, very much aware of that. But second, I also think that we can and should use the same principles from the science of influence, to recruit people and to shape more positive behavior and choices. Thank you.